with the advent of JORC and putting some minimum requirements for reporting in place, I think we have seen improvement in resource and reserve estimation. I think we've seen improvement in practices within companies. We've seen improvement in the methods, improvements in the types of technology being deployed. So when I reflected on that, I thought, if we do that for reconciliation too, we've got a chance.
Heath and I met when I connected with the company K2Fly a few years ago, a company that works in the resource governance space. Of course, K2Fly sold to Excel KKR last year and since then rebranded to Quartex, where Heath now works as chief scientist. It's a bit strange that our mutual circles of interest hadn't previously overlapped before that, given Heath's passion for things like public reporting, resource estimation, and reconciliation. It's on this topic that I wanted to pick Heath's brain. He put out a great paper in 2017 together with none other than Craig Morley, another important voice in the reconciliation space. And before that, in 2014 with Rayleen Hargreaves, also someone well-versed in the dark arts of reconciliation. Adding to this database on reconciliation knowledge, he recently wrote a white paper with the title A Management System for Mine Reconciliation, where he stepped through some overlooked aspects of good reconciliation that had not yet been captured. So in this conversation, Heath explains a couple of key missing links in reconciliation and why he does believe in reconciliation. I hope you get something out of this chat. Enjoy. How's it going, Heath?
I'm very well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What have you been up to?
Busy.
Yeah. What's busy in your new setup?
Well, I'm very busy trying to sell software and preparing for a big showcase event that we're holding tomorrow. So we've got almost 100 customers and other people coming along to the Ritz-Carlton in Perth.
Oh, wow.
To hear our CEO and senior execs talk about the new company.
Yeah.
Talk about what we're about, what we value, what we're going to do for customers. And I'll be manning a booth and talking to people about resource disclosure, mining reconciliation and various other things. So it should be fun.
Yeah.
Canapes and champagne. It should be, yes.
So tell me, who's attending that? What kind of groups and companies?
Examples would be Anglo Gold Ashanti, Goldfields, FMG, Pilbara, all sorts of different companies, Mitsui as well. It's quite diverse because we're not entirely just mining.
Yeah.
The new company has workforce management solutions, health and safety solutions, governance and risk solutions, land management, GIS type solutions, as well as the stuff around resource reserve reporting, mining reconciliation, mining geology. So it's quite a diverse portfolio.
But can I just pick you straight away on this sort of resource reserve reporting, right? Because it flows off the tongue really nicely. But what's the concept here from a software perspective? What's the value proposition?
There's two things. There's two value levers that we pull here. One is process efficiency, and the other one is strong governance. So process efficiency is enabled through digital workflows. What we do is we set up a model of a business, an organogram. So it has at the highest level, we're corporate center, and then some of our customers set up by product or commodity group, some set up by geography. And they have this hierarchy of their business that ultimately at the bottom level shows the reporting entities. So it could be an open pit, an underground, a stockpile, whatever it might be. And then what we do is we attach people and roles to each of the nodes in that organogram. So the system knows who's doing what. And those roles are things like a data capture role. So there might be a geologist who at a mine site who's got the role of capturing a resource table of information and associated supporting documentation. And there might be other people like typically general managers at mines like to know what's going on and feel like they're approving things. So there'll be notifications set up so they know what's going on and they might actually get involved in reviewing and approving information. So this is how we set up these digital workflows. Everyone involved in the process is communicating with the system. They get email notifications, they click on a link and they're in the system to do their job, whatever that might be.
So a bit of a governance plug-in basically to help people organize beyond the usual, because I'm trying to sort of on the fly here trying to work out what other softwares are out there, because there's things like Employment Hero, right, which is more of an HR piece of software, but that also allows you to do a whole bunch of things automatically. But this is obviously sounds like very specific to mining, obviously, with its various nodes and points and things that need to be delivered. That I'm guessing not many other pieces of software do.
We're not aware of any competitors in the market.
No.
Our competitors are in-house built spreadsheets and databases.
Yeah.
That's most commonly what we find.
So does that make it easier or harder to sell what you're selling here?
Well, it depends on who the people are, actually. People who value good governance love our software. Because it obviously anything that happens in the system is tracked. There's a full audit trail of who did what when as part of a reporting process.
So I'll poke the bear straight away, but does that mean that you can only really sell to the people who know what their problems are and who are probably already fairly self-organized to a degree that they know what they don't know? And doesn't that limit your market like from the get-go?
They're the best people to sell to because they get it.
Yes, but there's not many of them, I'd argue. That's probably like the bigger ones might be, well, hey, does bigger mean better organized? You probably can answer that better than I can, but...
Well, this is really interesting. The market dynamics here are quite interesting, and our success early on was with big companies.
Exactly.
Because they've got experienced people, smart people who know what they're about, they know their business, and they know what they need. They know what their risks are. And they've got the more complex portfolios that generate the problems. The problems arise from the complexity of having different commodities, the complexity of having 20, 30, 40, 50 competent persons in your business as part of a process. So those sorts of companies got it really early on. And as we've gone over time, over the last 5 years, and we've rebuilt the software. We had to use modern technology. It was initially built on technology, old Python type technology, and it's just not secure anymore. So we rebuilt the software. Yeah,
it's all cloud-based now, I presume, and all that
that's right. Yep, it's software as a service. It's cloud-based. People pay a subscription. But in recent times, we've sold to a gold company that has, I think, two mines.
Yeah, wow.
And the reason they want it is really interesting, right? It's because they've got young people on these mines, young professionals, who haven't done competent person type work before. And so they don't really know what's involved. And so the senior guys in this company said, well, we need some guide rails. We need something to help take our people through the process step by step by step by step. And they looked at our solution and said, wow, that's what we need. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah. So from an affordability perspective, you don't need to be a BHP to afford this. Well, can you openly talk about the sort of, are we talking 3 zeros, 4 zeros, 5 zeros here? How does it work roughly?
It's a really small company, easy implementation. It's probably going to cost them about 50,000 in annual recurring revenue. Yeah. And we like to sign people up for 3 or 5 years. So that's a ballpark. It varies depending on every customer. We look at what their portfolio is and what their challenges are, but that's ballpark. And the big guys, obviously, much more.
Yeah, and I guess what does success look like? Because I had a few other conversations go live recently. Conversations that I had at MREC, right, and even talking to the people at Veratio or other service providers. How do you sell value, right? And even when it's neutron activation scanner on the belt, how do you express that in dollars saved at the end of the year, which is obviously difficult to do, but you guys must have worked up a number of case studies where you try to make that value proposition as clear as possible and express it in dollar value.
It's hard to understand and explain talk about value for almost any situation. But
yeah, exactly.
We boiled it down to, like I said, there's two value drivers here. One's the process efficiency. So you can enumerate the value of that by understanding how much time your people spend doing this work.
Yeah.
And it's, funnily enough, companies don't understand it because they never think about it. They just get the people and do the work. But that adds up to hundreds of thousands of dollars a year when you do the calculations.
Easy formula, yeah.
Oh, yeah, easy. And the other value driver is governance. So that is really about value protection. It doesn't generate value per se, but it helps you avoid reputational damage. It helps you making mistakes in public statements.
Yeah.
And there are precedents where that has cost companies in penalties and fines and share price. So you can put some rough numbers around that as well.
Yeah, sure. And maybe on that, I mean, everybody loves a good war story. What are the kind of things that you're seeing out there that has either led to this, like, guys, we need to do something about this, or what are the train wrecks that you're seeing out there that either still need fixing or being fixed? So maybe a little bit of a change of direction here, but it sounds like that's something that the industry was needing, because it's very hard to sell solutions in the mining industry, very hard.
Oh, yeah.
So there must be people need to recognize they have a problem, and it needs to be clear to everybody, not just the company itself, right? So what are you seeing out there at the moment that you're either still playing with or working towards, or is this the end line? You're just selling this, or is there more to come to solve more solutions in this general space?
Yeah, a couple of good questions in that. I mean,
bit of a ramble,
search,
but yeah.
yeah. Well, this is getting to the nub of an industry problem. And if you jump on ChatGPT, ask it about all the stuff-ups in public reporting and financial penalties for companies, you find things like that. Rio Tinto and coal deposits in Mozambique, and
right, yeah.
There's actually quite a few things out there. And interestingly enough, here in Australia, there's been very few financial consequences for companies. There's one or two. I think there was one for about $30,000, a fine for a gold company. So there's actually very few in Australia. Maybe that's because we invented JORC and we're really cracking hot.
Oh, now you're pissing people off, man. Now you've done it. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, yeah.
And that leads into what's new. So I'm hoping, and I did agitate, and I got involved in the JORC working groups around mine reconciliation, because I think that is, for me, a really good way for companies to show value to their shareholders by saying, we thought we had X in the ground, and when we mined it and processed it, we got X plus or minus a bit out of the ground. So we delivered the value we promised you.
Yeah.
For me, that's what mine reconciliation is about.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you and I both know that mine reconciliation is an octopus, a gelatinous monster,
at best,
with all sorts of problems associated with it. But if we don't start reporting it and talking about it and having people ask questions about it, it won't improve. So that's one thing that will come in the solution as well. We're already working on mine reconciliation.
So let me jump on that, because I think we both knew that reconciliation was going to be on the table today, and it literally is, because I did print out the paper that you wrote this year, and I do want to go in a bit of detail on that. It's I think it's a great contribution to the forever growing list of reconciliation papers, and I don't really know where I want to take the conversation, but I see this centrifugal force. The same concepts are spinning around, and it's the same echo chamber as some of the other familiar topics that, we all talk about repeatedly, whether it's the lack of innovation and so on, who needs to do better and why. But there is, and I quite like to get straight to the nuts of it. The management system for my reconciliation is what the paper is. And you really bring out the people problem, right? And I really think, and it's been done before by others, because you talk about the reconciliation champion, and you know that we're aligned on that thinking. I'll try to get to my point by this sort of entry point. If the people part is a big part of the problem, you can also extrapolate that to the simple perspective that you need to know what your problem is, and that there's people that need to think about that problem. If you talk about people being a fundamental component of reconciliation, and there's clearly so much misalignment still out there of what best practice reconciliation is, and whether we should still use F1 and 2 and 3, or whether we should give it descriptions. Plus, people don't actually fundamentally practice good reconciliation in way too many places. It's just a wicked problem, and one that only the 12 experts talk about between each other, and you don't actually connect with the very people you want to connect to solve the problem. All right, and that's a very dark look on things, but I think that's probably a reasonable phrasing of my point. And maybe to turn it into a question: how do we get from talking to each other about this to actually connecting to people on the ground? Because, as you point out in a paper, it is deeply political, because it's attached to KPIs and all the rest of it. It's misunderstood. And we are not demanding it as a deliverable for our shareholders. And I think you hit the nail on the head with that. The moment you solve that problem, we kind of have to deal with it. And maybe that's when we get a bit of a revolution. And it's the new JORC code and the requirement, or the intended requirement, let's just be honest, the intended requirement for reconciliation to be acknowledged. Is it enough, in your view, to be the catalyst for that wave that we're all looking for? Sorry, long-winded stuff here, but I think you get where I'm going.
It boils down to, how do we transform and improve industry? And I've come to the view that public reporting is one of those avenues. Because I think, I've been around a while, and with the advent of JORC and putting some minimum requirements for reporting in place, I think we have seen improvement in resource and reserve estimation.
Okay.
I think we've seen improvement in practices within companies. We've seen improvement in the methods, improvements in the types of technology being deployed. So when I reflected on that, I thought, if we do that for reconciliation too, we've got a chance. So I'm being optimistic, and that this gelatinous octopus problem is non-trivial.
Sorry, just to interrupt. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding it, because I quite like that. And it's actually nice to hear an optimist when you're talking JORC, right? Because everybody's a freaking pessimist, and it's all sucks, and it's all more bureaucracy, and you can make an argument for that. But you said two things so far, and that is, we haven't actually seen many train wrecks in Australia, if that's what you would call JORC land, right? And there's obviously far more to that simplification than that. And B, you're saying, look, that might even have to do with the strength of reporting. And even if we make the reporting even stronger now, there might actually be some hope for this, whether it's reconciliation or other concepts, which is, I'd like to hope the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's not forget Poseidon that triggered JORC as a train wreck. So I do think that it has the potential to create an impetus. It has the potential to create improvement. The other thing about connecting with people is to publish papers, is to get an argument at conferences, at other places, and go and talk to people. The best way to improve reconciliation is for mining companies to understand its value, and to invest in people going to sites and coaching and training, guiding, helping with the work. And that's I've had that role in the past. So there are companies in the world who understand the value of reconciliation and invest in it. But typically it's seen as a very technical field of expertise, and it's left to someone who cares about it on a mine site, who's very clever and smart to go and find the data and the information and somehow pull it together and start analysing it.
Can we just debunk that right here, right now, right? Because I made some notes in this paper that you put in front of me, and I think you're spot on. I think if we say the business of reconciliation, then, you know, I've had in the early start of my career this ninja feeling, right? Who are these mysterious people who are the ultimate specialists that have special signatures and stamps, you know, in their pocket to do whatever it is that they do, you know, to achieve that accolade, you know, that status as and I think we're doing ourselves a disservice with the papers, and I want to come back to that, because the more I just talk to people like this, the more I feel we're actually finding an audience for this, because it's far easier to take a shit in the toilet to listen to two dudes talking about reconciliation than it is to print a freaking paper out and lie there on your bed with your partner complaining that you know, that's. I think papers, I mean, I love writing them myself because it structures my thinking, right? So, you know,
Exactly.
100%, and it's a good legacy document that can sit there and all the words are correct and so on.
And it forces you to do research.
And it forces you to do research, right? So now, and I think, you know, I think it's a really good contribution there. I will get into a bit more detail if you don't mind later, but the fact of the matter is that reconciliation it's overhyped as a concept. You're just comparing shit, and it's all, when you break it down, common sense comparison philosophies, right? So
Yeah.
the philosophies itself, but then you start reading papers about F2 accolade and R2A and F1B sub-zero, blah, blah, blah. And you're out, because it just becomes unnecessarily complex. And this is why I like what obviously Craig introduced in 2014 and even earlier than that, and what you've carried forward in this paper as well, is just to simply call it what it is, instead of just you know, making these terms all sound so special handshake-like. Yeah.
And I think you're right that there is a certain, I'm not sure if stigma is the right word with reconciliation, but for me, the activities that I put under that banner are simply business improvement, continuous business improvement. And it actually needs a generalist, not a specialist, to get that right at a mine site. It needs someone who understands enough about all the activities and the mine value chain so that they can sniff out where a problem could be. So they need to understand geological work. They need to understand how that gets used in planning across all time horizons. They need to understand something about geometallurgy, something about metallurgy, processing, survey. They need to have spent time in a mining machine, right, and on a drill rig. And they need to be able to pull people together as a team, because like everything in mining, these activities are a team sport. They're best done as a team sport. You need different perspectives, you need different ideas, you need diversity of thinking to be able to get the value out of it at the end of the day.
And obviously one of the key, so I completely agree with all of that, and I think another sort of skill is that, you know, you don't need to be a specialist to be a good forensic analyst, right? So if you just look conceptually at something that goes in and something that goes out, there's a common sense approach to figuring out in detail why this doesn't match that. And it's just a tenacity at which you look at the data that creates the value, right? Because as we all know, you could look at something, but then when you really open the bonnet and start digging around, that's when you start finding answers. And there is a tenacity required there on top of that generalist. A generalist always has this sort of negativity because it means that you don't know enough about anything, but particularly for reconciliation, there's not many people that understand everything from the drill rig to a gold bar coming out the back end of a plant, right? There's a lot happening there. So
I think that practical experience, actually being in a mine, having spent time every day going into a mine and seeing what happens, is really important. You need to have several years experience doing that, and if you've done that in one commodity, in one mining method, that's something. But if you've done it for multiple commodities in multiple different mining scenarios, that takes you to another level, because you start to triangulate between those things that's safe. And for example, when I started working in coal in reconciliation, people would tell me that there was no point doing reconciliation. We don't do grade control here. Right? There was this thing that reconciliation came from metal mining. And we're coal miners, so to take that away, that's not relevant here. But when you start to look at the process of how they're doing their mining, what do they care about? Well, they care about exactly to the millimetre where the top and bottom of the coal seam is. So reconciliation for them is about predicting where that is and then finding where it is and learning about why the prediction was different to the actual. And that's the whole point of reconciliation.
Well, no, you make that point very clearly in your paper as well. And I think, that important is you're predicting something, and it goes to the fundamental concept of running any business. Everybody makes a business plan, and your ability to kind of scope out your market and how you're going to get your product to market and at what margins kind of shows your shareholders how efficient you are in doing that thing. And if you can't even understand that for your own business, it's great that a gold bar pops out at the other end, but your shareholders want value, and we need to demonstrate that. But one thing that I get stuck on, with this discussion is the principle of the reconciliation champion, right? Because in taking what you were just saying before, so if you want a generalist there, so let's just get one thing. It isn't just a consultant coming in and waving their magic wand with some F1 and R2 factor terms. I mean, we need the people to teach us how things work. So yes, before I get into trouble with people, we need that. But who is the person on site, or in a larger or in a smaller mining company who take that responsibility? Because my experience is it's usually a geologist somewhere that has at least 12 levels above them of hierarchy and complex interactions, and they just do the mechanics of it, but are probably not across experience-wise to having seen all of these things, and it becomes a transactional process. So I've been advocating to have this person elevated to a fairly high position so that they, by therefore have experience that matches that level of pay, but also the clear status within the company to actually ask the questions and be appreciated and not ostracized when they actually try to have an awkward conversation between two departments, right? I mean, it's very difficult to change that in a mind that is large and has been doing this for years. How do you deal with that?
So the key is they have to be able to influence within their business. And to do that, you have to have credibility. And so I agree with you. I like to see this person be the manager of technical services at a mine. That, for me, that's a really good fit if it's the right person. And if they've got credibility, and we shouldn't assume that just because you've made it to manager that you've got credibility. Credibility means you know what you're talking about, and people listen to you because you communicate in such a way that it makes it important. So it doesn't have to be the technical services manager, but it has to be someone who's got that style of credibility. And it must be clear to everyone at the mine that the general manager pays attention to that person and listens and enacts the recommendations that come out of the process. If you've got that situation, it can be successful.
No, that's and you make this point here as well. You say conducting oneself with humility, right? I mean, that's not something that you read in a technical paper, quite. But you clearly know that it doesn't work if you start stomping around as a Joe, that you understand what happens in a plant. I understand what happens in a plant, but I've never worked in a plant, so how the hell can I go in and tell you that it's wrong, right? Is that what you mean?
That's what I mean. It means that you have an open mind, you realise that you don't know everything, and you listen to people. And you open yourself to being taught new things all the time. If you're doing that, your process and your outcomes will improve. But if you stomp around and bang tables, and sometimes you need to do that to get people's attention, but that's not how you improve the process.
No, but and sorry to keep on this topic, because I think so. I think this is in the direction of the solution. I agree with your philosophy here, but then there's still the practicalities of, let's say you've got a sizable company or a mid-tier, it doesn't matter. You've got a bunch of mines around the place, different jurisdictions, and you want your champions, right? Are they people who naturally transition out of the woodworks in the geology department? And where I'm trying to get to, there's never a development pathway for these people, right? It is almost like by osmosis, people end up in this, you can do you're good with Excel formulas and you seem to understand a bit about it, this and that, and you're half a decent person. You go and do, and that might well be a good solution by chance, but why can't companies have, because we have development pathways for our resource geologists, we get them to go on resource estimation, classes and all that sort of stuff. How can we create a pathway for these people, right? That really, all the way with an office in Denver, where even at the corporate office, there is one person there that is in charge of all the reconciliation of all the sites.
Well, I think I come back to the public reporting. I think that's one of the things that's helped companies realise that a resource geologist as a role is really important.
Yeah.
And they should develop them and train them, make sure they're doing the right things, because they are going to go publicly and talk about their resource estimates. So that's got to be done properly. So if the same requirement existed for reconciliation, it might open up more explicit pathways for development. But I want to just make a comment about what you pointed out there about it being mostly geologists who do this. And the reason for that is because in mining, at every single point in the value chain, there's one common element: rocks. Who understands rocks? Who cares about rocks? It's the geologist. So that's why they want to know what it was in the ground they thought was there. So they go into the mine and they look. And, I've done this countless times, print out cross sections or take a tablet. This is what I modelled. Is it there? Does it look like? And then you guys blew it up and mixed it all, threw it across the pit, and one rock went through the school next door. But anyway, you blew it up, then you mined it. So I'd want to sit in the digger when you're mining it and see how you do that. Because there's good ways to mine and there's bad ways to mine, depending on what you want to achieve. And what happens in the truck? So go and sit in the truck, find out what happens. And then it gets put on a stockpile. We'll go and look at the stockpile. What's on the stockpile? Oh, geez, that doesn't look very mineralised. It's going to go into crusher. My goodness. And then go into the plant, walk through the plant with the metallurgist. Go and understand how a weightometer works on a conveyor belt. All of these things are, you've got to,
No,
I think that's why geologists are usually the driving force, but it doesn't have to be a geologist. I've seen surveyors do a great job. And, surveyors spend most of their time in the mine. They see what goes on and understand it in a way that geologists don't.
Yeah.
And
I've been advocating for a team with some shared, I think it's not a single role at a mine because people go on leave and on break and so on. And if you've got a sizable mine, why don't you have a small team with an engineer and a process person, right? And all sitting in a small team that just looks after, and perhaps with an 80-20 allocation of time or whatever you want to do.
Yeah. There's other benefits to that. One of the things that happens, mines operate in swim lanes, okay? So, and they're very militaristic. And that's because they're really dangerous. And you have to have control from a management point of view. So that makes a lot of sense. But what happens is people collect their own data and put it in their own database. And other people in other swim lanes don't get to see it. They don't even know it exists, even though it would really add value to their work. I've seen this many, many times. And so by having this cross-functional reconciliation team, people start to talk to each other across those swim lane boundaries. You start to build that matrix in your organisation and you start to realise that you're duplicating, that you're not using information you could be using. All these things fall out of the process, and there's lots of value to that.
No, that's a good point. Something else you just said before, is it time for an ISO standard-like concept here? Because, and this conversation I'm also having around data quality and a few other concepts here, right? And the reason I'm asking that is that, regardless of the contribution, and everybody kind of has the same plea. let's standardize the nomenclature, right? But who needs to agree to that, right? I mean, is there, because as you find with almost every technical topic that you pick up, you can, whether it's a sampling theory, you'll find a group that says this and a group that says this. And then you look at the estimation and there's Clayton Deutsch standing there, to hell with Krieging, right? And, you know, and it's just, you're cheating, right? So you go, God, you know, that's not bringing us closer together. So is there something here as you, because, you know, I'd like to think I've read most of the papers out there that most often get quoted in this space, and you reference, you know, most of these in your paper here, and you know, we can go through them a little bit. We obviously have Harry, you know, F1, 2, 3 thing that is sitting there quite firmly embedded in a number of jurisdictions, subcultures, companies, whatever you want to call it. And I'm just going to try and summarize them, right, for people. Then you have Rayleen and, you know, plus or minus a number of colleagues over the years, whether it's Craig or Jeff Booth or yourself and various permutations, you know, putting extra layers in there in terms of the resource reserve and so on. So the introduction of of R factors and so on. So we have another letter, right? And then we have the ORPRO guys who talk about the blasting, right? Because then there's we have an F2, but hold on, if we'd have this and that, then it would be F2 with a little apostrophe, right? So, and we keep kind of diluting that original philosophy of Harry's. I actually find, probably as do Craig, and I don't want to put words in your mouth or his mouth, but I find just mind to mill, you know, unsatisfactory because I don't know what you mean by that. And I also don't think F2 is necessarily clear because I don't know what you mean by that. Yeah. And even, but the problem with the phrasing that, and I was talking to Rayleen about this on another chat very briefly, but the problem with that is that even if you call it, delivered to plant, it's still not exactly clear what node it is, and it will never be clear unless you make that very clear on a map or on some sort of cartoon or otherwise. A long way to ask a question with all these different people still saying something that isn't quite solidified. I mean, we've got Bill Shaw with a paper, and he's got his own little deviations of how he presents things. I tried to rope him into a call, and he told me to fuck off. So that was, in true Bill Shaw fashion, that was because I love to bring him on and to talk about exactly this. Why do we have that misalignment still?
There's a treasure trove of knowledge.
Right, absolutely. But he said, I've done enough of these, so fair enough too, man. And Bill, if you're listening, I'm sure that you're not, but come on and have a chat. But it's that alignment that, and you avoid that a little bit here, although you do make a point that you'd rather prefer to just call it what it is. But it's very easy on site to just say MCF because people there on site know what they mean. And if you need for every interaction and every phone call and email for them to write from the delivered to the for the belt weightometer, blah blah blah, that's just a mouthful. So maybe how can we get out of this standardization of nomenclature mess and actually truly get moving forward?
I don't know if that is necessary or could ever happen. So how would you know if you go to a mine and you're looking at some modelling work and you come across this thing OK_VAR? How would you know what that means? Mm-hmm. Well, you go and read the resource modelling report and hopefully it's described. Yeah. And so with reconciliation, I think it's sufficient for a Molan to build this reconciliation team, for them to work together to agree on what nomenclature they're going to use at their mine. Mm-hmm. But please write it down. Mm-hmm. Please document in a standard or a procedure or a code of practice or something like this where it's no longer just in your head. Mm-hmm. And if people if people want to know, they can find it. And if new people come into the mine, that's the first thing they read, and then they've got a chance of understanding what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. And it is really important. The language that gets used is really important because that's how they communicate. So I think for me, the elements, this is one of the reasons why I decided to write a paper on a management system, because if this work isn't sustainable, it is of no value. If you have the Seagull consultant come in and do a project for you about reconciliation and make a whole heap of recommendations, how do you know you're not going to screw something up? That could well destroy value because it doesn't have a solid foundation. It doesn't have a systematic and a durable process underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the language and is an interesting one. And again, JORC, you know, I've still got hopes for that, even though the draft is quite minimal compared to what I would have preferred to see. Hopefully there's some language in there that we can start to pervade through the industry. And I hope also that the guidance, the JORC guidance package is built up and standardised to a degree. But I think using descriptive terms is helpful because it's plain language, but you've got to write it down so people can discover it.
Okay. So using descriptive language, I agree with that in principle, and I want to come back to the system that you described before, because that's obviously, so far I've lifted a few things out of the paper and there's sort of peripheral, you know, things that drift around there, but you're really talking about a system, and I want you to sort of explain to people what you mean by that. But I just want to make one final attempt of getting clarity on the nomenclature here, because I like, intuitively, I should say, you know, the principle of descriptive terms, terminology. So from this point to that point, rather than F2. And I do actually think, just maybe disagree on a small point. I mean, I do find it difficult to go to sites or to interact with a group in another jurisdiction and to have to ask them, what do you mean by that, right? It would be nice if we actually, and yes, I can find it, but it won't be written down because otherwise I wouldn't be there in the first place, right? So there is a inevitability in that. And I think it would be nice if at least we have some grouping around some nomenclature that we're using. And if the JORC could make that recommendation in terminology, that would be great. But I asked Rayleen this as well, because even in that recent paper of a few years ago, we're still looking at factors like R2A rather than from the resource to the grade control model, right? And I forgot to really press her on that, but I don't know why. First we have papers with Craig, who's now back with Snowden and not with Snowden, and then he's here and there, and I don't freaking understand how all of this mess works. But can you guys of the 6 special ninjas that write on this stuff get your shit together and just tell us what to do? Yeah, that's almost what I want to say, right? And that's and then we shall. And the same I have with the data quality space, right? Can we just all calculate precision the same fucking way and get off this planet, right? And forever get rid of that discussion, and we won't, because we don't. Well, we have a little bit, I should say. Some people's done some really good work there. Yeah, but that would be good. Could you close that out for me, please? What is your personal view? So you're saying call it descriptive and lock that in, or call it descriptive, comma, but secretly do whatever you like as long as you report it? Could you just be clear?
Be descriptive, write it down in a standard, and show it on a map.
Right.
Use imagery so that people have got some chance of remembering it. So even from Craig's very simple mind value chain series of nodes, that was great.
Yes.
Because people can easily remember it and locate themselves. And if you say resource to plant, immediately you see that arc diagram. Okay, that's what we're talking about, or near enough.
Yeah. No. So I like that, but even then, you know, even in that, yeah.
I just had a flashback to the working group, the JORC working group. Okay, so we did get 10, a few more, of us reconciliation noddies in a virtual room to try and come up with a standard.
Right.
And it just devolved into a shit show.
Every working group, right? Sorry, I'm on two, so I know. It's just because they're complex topics.
Yeah, who's going to make the ultimate call?
Well, the thing is, because again, I'm a bit OCD with this, but even in Craig's paper, in his own tables and images, there is a discrepancy. And there's small words, but between the various tables that he has in his 2014 paper, there are actually discrepancies. And I look at that, and I don't want there to, if you say this in the image, I want you to say the same in the table. And I just don't understand why. And that's what I wanted to ask of Bill Shaw as well, because he uses somewhat similar terms, but they're subtly different. And to the noob who doesn't understand, what deliver to the crusher really means, right? That is important as you try to wade yourself through the literature or the best practices and all that sort of stuff. So
it is important. It is important, but you should rein in your OCD tendencies a bit. In fact, quite a lot, if you want to work in reconciliation.
You're spot on.
Because there is uncertainty in every step. And the art of reconciliation is navigating uncertainty. And coming to decisions and actions is what you're about with reconciliation.
No, okay. So no, I hear you, but I am going to push back on that. There's no problem with the uncertainty when it comes to the quantitative data, right? But you're not giving yourself a head start if you can't even communicate with people on what uncertainty you're talking about, because you're not clear which 2 points it is, right? And it's that when I look and step back and I look at that map, and you stand around a table in a mining office and people say the this and the that, and you go, sorry, me again, so what exactly are you comparing here? Oh, this and that. And somebody else will say, no, I thought it was that. And you go, okay, well, this is going to be fun to watch.
Well, actually, that's a really good point, René, because that conversation is really valuable.
Oh, it is.
And again,
that's where it happens. Yeah.
You see it, I say it every time I go to a mine and say, okay, we're going to build this reconciliation team. Let's get in a room.
Yeah.
And let's start drawing this map of the value chart. Let's start with the material flows. Let's track them through the process. And we start there, and everyone's, yep, this is what happens. And then an argument breaks out. It says, no, it doesn't happen that way.
Yeah.
It happens this way.
And then you're winning, right? Yeah.
But everyone's learning now
about
different perspectives. And someone might be right, someone might be wrong, but quite often they're both right.
Yeah. Well, so I'll give you an open goal here. So you referenced Scott's paper from a couple of years ago, and if you're listening, Scott, you've hung up the boots now, but we're going to miss you in this industry because we need voices like this to challenge the status quo. But obviously, his controversial paper, or I don't believe in reconciliation, obviously provocative for. Scott is never provocative, obviously, but what would you say? Because you've been very diplomatic in the paper, because Neil Schofield in 2001 first had some shit to say about reconciliation. Okay, good points to make, but I have to disagree. I do fundamentally believe in reconciliation for exactly that process that you just described. The worst thing that can happen is that you'll learn something about your process, and by doing that, you improve by definition. But how do you see that?
So when Scott asked me to take a look at his paper, that the headline doesn't actually reflect what he's trying to say.
Fair enough too. Yeah.
And so in that regard, I thought, yes, I understand you want to be provocative, and maybe more people will actually read the paper because of that. Mm-hmm. But there's a risk there that you put people off, as you just said. But I mean, Scott has deep insight, lots of experience. I first worked with him in 98, 99. So he's seen all sorts of things, and he's worth listening to. And what he gets to is understanding the conditions under which reconciliation can add value. And his conditions are quite stringent, actually. And he's got some excellent points about that. One of which is about tolerance limits. Yeah. So it's very common in the industry. It's becoming a standard, if you like. Tolerance limits is something that we can say and people understand it. Plus or minus X% around a measure. If it goes outside that, you should be worried. Scott makes a point that that's very simplistic, and some processes that happen in mines and in estimation are non-linear, and actually a better approach is to simulate the mining process and simulate the ore body And then you have the ability to start running scenarios and seeing outcomes. And you might find that the tolerance limits should be asymmetric, actually. And that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, yeah, go on.
No, well, for me, that was a minor epiphany. I think he's right.
Well, the first epiphany there is, and I talked to Scott about this a few years ago. I mean, I think a lot of people don't recognize what is blatantly in front of their eyes is that if you create a plot of your, let's say your F2 performance over time, and you look at what that looks like, what does it look like, right? And then you can say you do the same at your laboratory by introducing CRMs. And what is on the x-axis? Time. What is on the y-axis? Performance. What is that called? Quality control. This is your ultimate quality control of your mine. This is a process control chart of a mine, and therefore, ergo, arrow to the right, by definition, that can only add value if you're working within set DQOs, as I call them, data quality objective, which are tolerance limits, right? And not just the one point being outside or under some sort of statistically non-significant tolerance line, because I know the point that Scott makes in his paper, how significant are those tolerance lines anyway and what are they based on? Full credit to pointing out that fallacy, but the trends in those plots, and this is again also exactly what people miss with CRM plots. It's not about the stupid 3 standard deviation dot by itself. There's so much more to that. The trends that you can see, that tells a story, right? If every 3 months it's 1, 2, 3, 1 down, 1, 2, 3, probably something that you can understand about the performance of that mine. It's true quality control. You need tolerance limits. I think you make an absolute, the title is provocative, but the substance, as per usual with Scott, is just spot on. And it's what a lot of people miss in this simplistic, just look at this 1 month. It's either within a tolerance and everybody goes, phew, the managing director doesn't ring everybody up to give him a hard time. And we skate to the next one and we keep our fingers crossed and the butt cheeks tight.
And my personal bugbear is people thinking that these tolerance limits are sacrosanct.
Yes.
That they have some independent universal truth to them.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And actually, I want to screw them down as tight as I possibly can.
Yeah.
I want to learn over time and look at those trends and that variation. And if I see a reconciliation that F2, if I see it just bumbling around the 100% or the 1 over time, and my tolerance limits are out here, I'm going, well, I can either, I can be really happy, or I can go looking for more value.
That's spot on, right? And look, this is the nuts, and we should probably get people to start at this and then reverse back to the start of the call, because I mean that's it, right? It's not some corporate finance, tick in the box because you've done well. There is a learning experience, there's a business improvement, and if it's within that tolerance, let's all go and find out whether we can do even better. Right, and that actual line, I talked to Mo Shrivastava about this a couple of weeks ago in the office here, because I asked him, where the fuck is the 1 in 20 coming from, right? I mean, I always say, if I meet the guy on the street, I'll I'll have a conversation. But it's the Fisher, right, from the famous Fisher test, the statistical test. And it got me thinking, right, because we plunk 5% on that plot and nobody asked where it's coming from, why it's there, whether we should change it, whether it should be asymmetrical and all those things you pointed out. It's just there because we did that 20 years ago and we still do it that way. Yeah.
So I'm actually, the tolerance limits idea is so intuitive that it is useful. And,
absolutely.
And Scott makes a valid point. But I worked at an iron ore mine in Brazil, and when I got there, they were patting themselves on the back when their production was within 2% absolute iron grade of what they predicted. Mm-hmm. And I said to them, you guys are kidding yourselves. That's rubbish. Mm-hmm. You should be able to get within 0.5% of iron. Mm-hmm. And they looked at me as if I was a crazy gringo, which I am. Fair play. But over time, over working with them for a couple of years, they got there. They achieved it. Yeah. And I think they were just too busy being happy and cruising along.
Yeah,
but they need it to be challenged. And that's, for me, that's what tolerance limits can be used for.
Yeah.
If it's all,
100%.
you know, that's my approach.
No, look, I think it's really good to point out and fully agree with that. And I have thought about inviting Scott to the mix at some point, because I'm sure he's got a few things to say. But the three of us will probably sit there for a few hours there. Look, I wanna close out with you, because I'm sure you've got your afternoon to go back to, other than to talk about reconciliation.
I could talk about it for days.
Look, that we should, but maybe we'll lose Jason along the way, because although not a mining person, but shout out to Jason for turning himself into a mining professional by just sitting in all these bloody podcasts. Let me talk about, I just want to point out a couple more things, and maybe you can sort of briefly explain the system, right? Because you say here, and I'm just quoting here, I argue that sustaining mine reconciliation. So you already mentioned sustaining before, but it's a word that gets bandied around a bit loosely, but it's on point here. You argue that sustaining mine reconciliation requires a management system with three key ingredients: principles, enablers, and an iterative structured mine reconciliation process. I think we talked about the iterative structured mine reconciliation process and a few of the things working in there. We talked about enablers as well, so the people who work in that space, who actually make this move, and you've got more to say about that. And then the principles, but and the principles, you've listed them here in a table. How can you briefly describe this system, and is there a cross link to the software then as well, or is this some sort of hybrid, or is this yet to come, or where does it go with that?
It's always evolving, but the system can be imagined as a Venn diagram. That's a good way to think about it. Principles, the enablers, and the process. And in the middle, you've got successful, sustainable mine reconciliation. It's been my experience that people doing reconciliation at a mine site don't think about the principles, and they don't think about the enablers, and they should start there. Always start with philosophy. Get your thinking straight. Be clear about what the problem is, what your objectives are, and then figure out what you need, what conditions need to be in place for you to be successful in solving that problem. And so, principles like, you've got to think about the full mine value chain. You can't just look at one part of it, because there's interdependencies upstream and downstream. So you've got to look at the whole value chain. You've got to involve people from all walks, not just technical professionals. The mine overseer sees a lot of stuff that the mine geologist doesn't see, or the mine engineer doesn't see. The digger operator is at the coalface, literally. So go and talk to them. That's another principle. It's a team sport. Get everyone involved. Sort out your data. Make sure you understand the quality of it. And ideally make the quality fit for purpose, if you can. And that's going to take money. So you need that senior level support for this to succeed, because the enablers cost money, but they create value. Value is revenue minus cost. So you can't focus just on the revenue, and you can't focus just on the cost, which is what we see time and time again in mining. It's screw the costs out, throw out the exploration drilling, you don't need that. Grade control drilling, what? No, we're not going to spend money on that. All those things. And to do this properly, you need to invest. And if you make it systematic, then budgeting for it becomes a lot easier. And you can go to management and say, over the last 18 months, we did 6 improvement projects. We thought they would deliver X value, and guess what? We got within 10% of that. So demonstrate that you're adding value, and you will get budget to do more. You'll get budget to get a better sample station put in the process plant. You'll get money to do more grade control drilling. You'll get money to solve the problems if you can show a sustainable, systematic approach.
Nice. Yeah.
That's the objective of the management system.
Now, look, I like it.
And the people. One of the things I really like, a tool that I've used with great success that makes people feel very, very awkward, is the ADCAR tool. It's a change management tool. Awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, reinforcement. If you think about those dimensions, and I usually do a a survey monkey. So you can be anonymous, set out a list of questions that speak to those dimensions of the ADCAR model and find out if people really care, if they want to be involved, have they got the knowledge, have they got the resources, and do they know that the senior management are looking for results?
Yeah.
That the general manager cares about this stuff, talks to his team about it, and it's important. All of these elements speak to how people behave. And if you are assessing that on a yearly basis or whatever it might be, you can actually start to understand where people are at. And then you've got the ability to take action. You can say, well, Gene Lewis in grade control doesn't have the right training. Okay, here's train him. Or the software. And yes, ultimately the software will embody a lot of this thinking. The trick there, the trick as always with software, is creating something that people are going to buy.
Yeah, well, and use them, because plenty of people buy stuff and they don't actually use it. Then it is.
That's right.
Yeah.
So if we need to publicly report reconciliation, I might be able to sell some software.
Yeah.
It's the evil plans.
Look, I see, right? Yeah. No, I'm sure that's not the case. Look, I think it's brilliant, and for what it's worth, I think it's a great contribution to the pile of reconciliation literature that is there. It touches on things that other papers don't touch on. It's got some elements, and I think you laid it out very well. I really enjoyed reading it. I'll put a link in the description of the video. I'm really glad talking with you about this, and I'm sure we can do it. We can pick it up maybe in a year's time to see what's moved and coming out of the JORC code when it's finally there, to see how the dust settles around it. So yeah, thanks very much for making the time. And
no, thank you. I appreciate being able to have the conversation and talk about this stuff. I find it fascinating.
Good stuff, man. Hey, good to see you, and speak soon.
Yeah, cheers, Ray.
See you, man.
Thanks. Bye.